The session is a panel on culture and aims to help participants to create a framework which enables co-creation of culture in a virtually enabled environment involving engagement from leadership and workforce at large. We are so delighted to have amongst us the session chair and moderator, Mr. Rajeev Dubey, Principal Advisor, Mahindra & Mahindra. Welcome to our esteemed panel, Dr. V Ramana Murthy, former Executive Vice President and Global Head HR, Taj Hotels, Ms. Rajkamal Veempathi, Head Human Resource, Axis Bank, and Mr. R. Anand, Principal Consultant and Advisor, HR, HCL Technologies Ltd. I request all our participants to keep posting their queries and questions in the Q&A box, please. With this, I hand over the session to the session chair, Mr. Rajeev Dubey. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, and welcome to this session. And I want to thank Rajan, who has given us the perfect transition from his session to our session, because he talked about experience, and culture, as we will see, truly is about the experience. Now, here is how we have structured our session. For the first part, each one of us will make a statement of no more than 2 to 3 minutes. Then we will share for no more than 3 to 5 minutes each some experience which I'll describe. So that takes us to 25 minutes. Then for the next 10 minutes, there'll be an interactive conversation between the panel members. And then we'll open up to the audience for Q&A. And then at the end, there'll be a 5-minute summary by yours truly. So let's start off with the first session, and welcome to my distinguished co-panelists. I request each one of us to speak for no more than 2 to 3 minutes on the question that I'll pose to you on culture. So the first one, which I will take, is from our experience. We have to talk from our experience. What is culture? So for me, culture is the way people in the organization behave in their everyday life and the experience that they create for their stakeholders as they go about their business activities. So it's the experience and the behavior vis-a-vis consumers, employees, supply chain partners, communities, government stakeholders, the whole, and shareholders. It is, if you like, and I'll close with this, what Sumantra Ghoshal, the late Professor Sumantra Ghoshal, famously referred to as the smell of the place. So that was my take on what is culture. Now, Raj is going to share with us why she thinks culture is important. Over to you, Raj.
Good morning, everyone. And I think Saturday well spent reflecting, actually good fodder for reflection as well. Thank you, Professor Rajan, as well. I think for me, being in a services industry, and you said, please share your experience as well. When we put out the tagline recently on Dil Se Open for our bank, one of the customer insights was vyavhar to vyapar sab karte hain, but vyavhar ek do log hi karte hain. You know, that is what is distinctive. Vyapar or vyavhar ka jo the entire transition on the root is culture. And it got me thinking, the fact that, Professor Rajan also spoke about, why is it important? I think technology and digitization has expanded human capability. It's made lots of things possible, but for me, it also has given the dark side, led to the dark side in organizations, where we think organizations are collective mass of objective men and women, right? For me, culture is that soul. Without the rational structures, without rational community of interests, culture is the soul which gives us purpose, which makes us believe things can be possible, right? Culture is also what enables leaders to have willing followers, right? It is really important. Again, going back to the Vyavhar question. Vyavhar is the one, how you behave internally and externally, which makes it possible. And the third part is, culture is where rubber hits the road. Frankly speaking, that's where it is. So for me, Why is culture important? It is the soul, it is the vyavhar, what we kind of display. And technology without this vyavhar is immaterial.
Thank you. Thank you for that excellent articulation. I come now to Anand. Anand, how do you create culture in 2 to 3 minutes?
Right, big question, Rajeev ji. But my experience says that a very compelling articulation of what it means to live that culture is a very important part of it. So, for example, at HCL Tech, we have used two simple expressions saying that ideapreneurship is our cultural statement. And what constitutes ideapreneurship, which is license to ideate and tools to ideate. So I think that is very action oriented. So do you know how to ideate and how to nurture, seed and harvest an idea? That is the tools to ideate. And do you have permission to do so in the organization? That is a license to ideate. So I think a compelling proposition like that. And then when you expand that statement, say, how do you really make tools to ideate available to everybody? Then you conceive a set of programs to make sure tools to ideate is available to everyone. The license to ideate is essentially, what we call our employees first philosophy. Value is created when employees to enable enthused
we lost
employees
Anand.
to add that value.
Anand, we've lost
and therefore,
you.
license to ideate becomes very central. So then you combine that and then really peer down and say, okay, in this business unit, is there a license to ideate? How do you ask that question? So spontaneously, are people generating ideas? Spontaneously, is it being nurtured? Is it being taken to the customer to convert that into value and to say whether it's making sense or not? I think by creating a very compelling statement and converting them into structured programs to see that the needle is moving is how I think culture can be built, Aditi.
Thank you, Anand. That was excellent. And I come now, last but by no means least, to my friend PV. PV, who creates the culture?
Thank you, Rajeev. In my view, that everyone is responsible for creating the culture in an organization. The popular perception is that culture flows from the top, and leaders are accountable for creating the right kind of culture. It's not completely wrong. Leaders are responsible for creating the right kind of context. I'm using the word context consciously. The leaders need to set the context or narrative, and everybody else, when people in the organization are inspired, everybody will bring that culture to life. I'll just take a minute to give an example. I worked for Taj and I still work for Taj. The narrative was said by the founder saying that, we run the business for the sake of the community. And generation after generation, the leaders have lived that value. And what happens, recently, when this COVID hit, what happened was, we were hesitating to impose the salary cuts, but business was very bad. Cash flows were running out. What happened was we reached out to the employees with an email saying that, there are several employees who are in distress, the contractual employees, FTCs, etc. Can you please contribute 20% of your salary? Within 6 hours, 95% of the people wrote back saying that, please take my salary. And some people wrote back saying that it's not 20%, please take 40% or 50% of my salary also. This is where I would conclude by saying that leaders set the narrative or context, and people within the organization live that context, and that's how culture is formed. That is my take on it, Raj.
Thank you. So I think our panelists have very nicely set, if you like, the context or the frame in which the rest of the session can proceed. So now let me come to the next part, where I'm going to ask my three co-panelists to share from their real life experience an incident or a series of incidents where culture played a crucial role in the outcome. And I would request you to include what did you do and what were the challenges that you faced. And I'm afraid you have a maximum of 5 minutes. So let's go in the reverse order now. So I'll ask PV to go first. Then I'll ask Anand and then Raj.
Yes. Thanks once again, Raji. I think that, again, I'm sharing one of my experiences. This was in the year 2005 when I first became the HR head, the CHRO of Coca-Cola in India. Coke got split into two organizations, It remained Coca-Cola India, remained as Coca-Cola India. And then the bottling entity, Hindustan Coca-Cola as we know it today, all that was created as a separate entity. And the point was the company was losing money through its years. It was left, right, and center. There were all kinds of practices. I'll not go into those details, but I would simply say that, that was not the right way of doing ethical business, or by whatever name we call it. Then here comes the leader, John Ustas from US. He came here, and during his 3-year stint, when I was his CHRO, not even once he talked about culture. But what did he do? He said that, a few things he used to demonstrate. One was respect for the frontline staff, respect for the frontline staff, respect for women. And then, John used to come to office by 9 o'clock and leave the office by 5 in the evening. And he never talked about, guys, you do it in this manner kind of a thing. And what did I do as the HR person? We created a framework and we called it inverting the pyramid. And what we all did was, we started working in the market, rolling up our sleeves and going from shop to shop and doing the job of our frontline staff at least once a month for 2-3 days. And similarly, getting more and more women into the frontline roles and into all roles. And also, John and all of us leaving the office by 5 o'clock when business was not doing well. Before that, people used to work till 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock in the evening also. So, it's what we call as work-life balance and all that stuff. Those things have fallen in place. And also, he taught us one thing, pride in what we do and pride in our brand. And, the entire organization got so inspired. Before giving salary increases, we never give salary increases without really impacting the frontline staff. And believe me on this, in 1.5 years time, the business turned around. And the same narrative, again, the leader sets the narrative. The same narrative is being continued even today also. Today, when I saw the news item that Hindustan Coca-Cola and the focus on diversity, I thought that, the narrative set by one leader and lived by many people in the organization, that still continues. So that's my experience on this particular aspect, Raj.
Thank you. Thank you. That was really powerful. Thank you, PV. Now, Anand, over to you.
So this was an incident that happened about 6-7 years ago, Rajeev. I was heading business HR for one of the large critical units of the company. And 4 years prior to that, my predecessor or my predecessor's predecessor had actually chosen the most talented individuals in the company, in the practice, to allocate to a customer for a very large deal that the chairman of the two companies were trying to do together. And that was the background. I did not know that so many good people have been assembled and sent into one single relationship like that. So suddenly, after 2 successive changes in the leadership and HR, so I discovered that my business had called and said there are 20 people who have resigned from a very important account. Can you come down? So I went to Bangalore and met this team of very young people. And as I was talking to them, the conversation started at 8 in the evening and it went all 3:30 the next day morning. I was trying to talk to them in a group just to build that sense of transparency that I'm talking to all of you. We recognize that many of you have left. I don't want to do a one-on-one call. So at 3:30 in the morning, it struck me that how can so many good people be there in one account? And I've never seen such a concentration. And next day morning, when I look back, I realized that this is what had happened. There are many good people. And this account, for whatever reason, that plan had not fructified. So the next day morning, by the first half of the next day, we had constructed a plan by which some of these very good people, assuming that they created a breakthrough in the next 6 months, would be upgraded to a very significant salary jump and a very significant career progression within a short time. And we didn't want to extend it to only those who had resigned. So we quickly converted that into a program that will be available to everybody, in the entire business. And we selected about 30 individuals, Rajeev, out of it. And there are many things that I would like to highlight here. One is the company didn't think twice before allowing somebody at the junior level at that time to create a program on the fly like that. And we discovered that something good was happening. Therefore, we were able to, sort of cross-pollinate it elsewhere. And these 30 individuals, each one of them, even today, get in touch with me for the breakthrough objective that the career path that we gave. And these 30 individuals, each of them at least brought 2 accounts to the practice, growing it 50% for 2 continuous years. And it once again convinced us that it doesn't matter what your age is, but if you have that sense of ideapreneurship in you, and you are given the license to ideate and the tools to ideate, that you can create wonders. And that's a very, very personally a very satisfying experience for me when I look back. So that is where I believe ideapreneurship really worked, and I saw it work in first hand, and therefore can talk about it with a lot of conviction whenever and wherever I go.
Thank you, Anand. That was a really powerful story. Okay, now Raj, over to you.
So bankers are supposed to be boring and much bandied about, right? No trust. So one of the distinctive things about, I think, our franchises and the people is humanity first. And that's why we were able to kind of put the strength out there in terms of proposition Dil Se Open. Frankly speaking, Demon, etc., the bank was much pillared. And there were a lot of practices that we needed to kind of look at also. But I think from there, if I look at the positive side of this, there's so many stories of people helping out customers in need, extending humanity. And we kind of put a program around it, talking about the positive stories so that we cross-pollinated across, as both PV and Anand mentioned. This year, one of the facets is, most of the bankers on the ground, despite COVID, despite lockdown, nobody said, I'll go back home. That was the strength. And I kind of people said the reason we are here is because the customers need us. And there were so many beautiful stories of how customers' relative in some other town was helped out by another Axis employee during COVID lockdown, where we used our franchise and help was extended because they were in need. I think humanity first is something, especially for service industry, that needs to be extended. And many, many stories like that. So our idea is to put those stories, amplify them, recognize them, but more importantly, also have the next generation of culture carriers, the legacy owners, talk about it and say this is something that we need to amplify, especially as tech becomes all pervasive in our life. We can't leave our humanity.
Thank you very much, and we are doing wonderfully well on time. So we move now into the third part, where the panelists, excluding me, have the opportunity to ask each other some questions, and we have a total of 10 minutes. So we will come to the end of this session at 11:50. So over to you, Raj, Anand, and my friend PV.
So I'll ask the first question to maybe PV. One of the things that people struggle with in culture is during changes, whether leadership changes or strategic changes, how do you honor and alter the culture? It's very difficult. We can talk about the rational part, but how do we honor the stuff that is strength, and how do we alter?
That's a great question, Raj. And I know why you have asked this question. I have seen, and you would have seen, every time when a new leader comes, everything gets changed. The top team gets changed, the culture gets changed, the way of doing business gets changed. It's unfortunate. It's because, we have given so much of importance to leadership, which is important, but, it is not that, leader is one person, who would change the organization kind of a thing. This is where I think the role of HR or any leader in the organization is to ensure that, the people reflect. It is, it's emotional intelligence. Professor Rajan was talking about emotional intelligence and its importance in running the business. How do we build that emotional intelligence, especially at the top team level, is an important thing I would focus upon. And when people genuinely reflect as to, what is valid and what needs to be changed, instead of trying to change everything and proving a point, trying to change everything, there is an ego issue involved in it. I would say that emotional intelligence is the fundamental thing for managing such situations and preserving the culture.
Raj, if you are okay, I also want to answer that question because it's a great question. I think I would say this culture of ideapreneurship is with HCL for 16 years now, and as explicitly articulated, and I believe it even existed prior to that. And it has survived the change of 3 CEOs over all these years. So I think my learning has been that it has to be made irreversible. So somewhere when it becomes grassroots, it becomes very difficult even for the next person to change, especially if it's producing value. I think the second thing I have noticed is the leaders should not put their stamp or name on culture in a very strong way. They have to make it everybody's property. And if they associate their name and identity too strongly, then the next person wants to leave their own legacy, and the temptation is to change it, to tweak it, to do all those stuff. The moment it becomes everybody's property, it acquires a sort of irreversibility. And that's what I have seen in retrospect, not that it was planned for, as things that ensure that across leadership transitions, across organizational life stages, the culture remained very solid and relevant.
Raj, I have a question for you. You talked about humanity and its importance in the service industry, and I can't agree more with you on that. It's absolutely right. My question is, what do we do to build that humanity into the entire organization? You know, by doing what we can bring in that kind of a humanity, looking at others and not at ourselves. How do we do that? And any experiences from your side?
It's a great question, and I tend to agree with all of that what you said. Essentially we are culture carriers in some of the intrinsic part of how the organizations are nurtured. I think stories have a beautiful way of preserving that humanity. All of us, I believe, are trustworthy, nice, warm people because we are human. How do you get that humanness to express in various training programs, in various conversations? And I think it will only get amplified if you legitimize it through stories that you do, or you kind of put out there, get out role models across. So we have this 10,000 story program every year through various sessions. So we have what we call value realizers. They are essential middle managers whose job is to collect stories. They are strong leaders who are culture carriers, who've been given that brand, and they collect these stories. And from the 10,000 stories, there's an extensive 5-step jury process who sits out, and we put out a value addition book. It is very, very honorable to be there. I think the journey is to amplify the stories and give legitimacy to people, even if I'm day one, saying that, okay, this is what it means to be an Axis banker. That's how we are doing it. That's our attempt. Some of it, I'm positively surprised with the stories that have come in. And every year, the stories keep on peeling another level of humanity there.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. And I happened to see the video on diversity which Axis Bank has created. That's very powerful. And the kind of work that you have been doing, I think that sets the culture. That sets the tone for the organization to move in the right direction. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, may I ask a question, Dr. PV? Actually, it is sometimes not very easy to explain the importance of culture to line managers, right? So it probably is easier to a marketing or a sales organization because they get it, right? They are in the business of persuading, convincing, etc. It is easy to explain it to people function leaders because they get it. But it may not be so easy to explain to a finance leader or an R&D leader or a manufacturing or an engineering leader. So have you also faced something where some people don't get it? They think it's too soft. And how have you communicated the importance of culture building to those leaders?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Anand. Thank you. See, from my perspective, communicating culture, there are it's a very, very sharp-edged sword, I would say. Many people over-communicate, talk about culture in every forum, every meeting. That is counterproductive. Living the culture, like I said, when John was there, it's if people are exhibiting those behaviors, Rajeev sir talked about behaviors, that plays an important role in creating the right kind of culture. If that is the case, if we can, especially at the senior leadership level, if we can exhibit the right kind of culture, if we are saying that, frontline staff is important, are we doing the job of, are we going and washing dishes? Singapore Airlines does it. Taj Hotels also does that to some extent. Are we going and washing? Are we going and doing their jobs? Are we empathizing with their needs? Then slowly, everybody would understand the power of it. And I think that there will be a tipping point when it starts getting changed. So I would communication, we have overused communication on culture. Many people don't understand as to what exactly we are saying when we use all that jargon, concepts, theories, and all that stuff. The second thing is integrating whatever we are doing as the business strategy into the business strategy. Like I was saying, inverting the pyramid became the business strategy during those years. This is my take on it, Anand. Thanks for asking that. Very powerful.
Thank you. And I have a question for Raj. Raj, actually, there is a conceptual tension between diversity and culture, right? Culture tries to align everybody into a certain way of behaving, thinking, feeling. Whereas diversity, promotes exactly the opposite, that everybody can bring their own self to work and we will all integrate everything together. And especially as an organization that is at the forefront of diversity, inclusion, how do you, reconcile these two conceptual tensions between a cultural alignment and a diversity agenda?
So one of the foundational pillars that we've looked at is values. Values are pretty much simple, which we kind of teach our kids and get into families and also extended family of an organization. So for us, values is a foundation. But the manifestation of all of this, both externally and internally, we've talked about Dil Se Open. That's not just a tagline. It's a promise to be inclusive, being respectful. Because only if you're inclusive in the society will you be able to service customers and create that distinctive edge. Only if you're open within will you also manifest the same philosophy for the employees to extend to the customers as well. So being open is not just a tagline, is not a, what you call some kind of fad. I think it's just, it is a philosophy, it is a deeply held belief and a strength of the brand that we want to promote. So it is, for us, it's not difficult. I think the difficulty is, okay, are we hiring for cultural fit? Some of those questions we've kind of taken away and we need to look at our recruitment and hiring processes, so on.
Fascinating. We could go on for a long time, but with your permission, dear panelists, should we open up to Q&A from the audience now? Okay, thank you. So now we are opening up for Q&A to the audience. And Dipen, you will have to help me to make sure that we try and answer as many questions as we can. And if the panelists could indicate which of, if the person who asked the question could indicate, if possible, who should answer that question, that will help. If not, then, we'll have to decide among ourselves. So over to you, audience. Dipen, now you'll have to help me a little bit with the questions.
So I'm posting them on your WhatsApp as discussed. So you know.
Okay. Now you're posting it on my WhatsApp. All right. Okay, just 1 second. Okay. All right. So there, just 1 second. Okay. So the first one is from Anjali, and the question is, what types of culture you follow in your organization? And it says, sir. Now, which person, Anjali, would anybody like to take that? What types of culture you follow in your organization?
Okay, so may I take it?
Yeah. Go ahead, Anand.
So I think underlying that question is the fact that culture is always a tension between two competing values. So one of the ways I like to think about culture is competing values. For example, would you want to spend more time in the external world, thinking about the external world, or about the internal world, about the immense possibilities that your organization offers? So external versus internal is one of the axis on which you want to think about culture. Similarly, stability versus flexibility is another axis in which you want to think about culture. You want to do lots of things on the fly, or you want to make sure that everything is orderly and predictable. And when you juxtapose these two axes, stability versus flexibility, internal versus external, you create sort of 4 quadrants of culture. And this is one of the ways in which you can typify your culture and say, my culture is this and my culture is not this. For example, if you are highly flexible in terms of how things operate and you are externally oriented, then you are what you can call as the entrepreneurial culture. So Apple is an example of an entrepreneurial company, right? So trying to Whether right now or not, one can argue, but at least a few years ago, that would be an example of entrepreneurship. For example, if you are externally oriented, but very stable, you have a method of doing things. That I would say is a market-oriented culture. So that is Unilever could be an example of that. So like that, that's one way by which one can characterize what you are and what you are not, and therefore choose what type of culture you are in some sense.
Okay. Thank you, Anand. The next question we want to take up is from Akshara Devi, and the question is: when is it unnecessary to change organization culture? Who would like to take that?
PV?
Yeah. Okay.
My take on that is never ever be so pronounced. Don't keep talking about changing the culture. That has become a sort of a fad. I don't really encourage anybody doing that one at any level. It is, I think, like we have been discussing, it is exhibiting the right kind of behaviors, setting the right kind of context is what we need to do. And I also would say that, when there is respect for people in the organization, don't try to change anything. Things will work out automatically. But talking about performance culture, it is the hidden agenda is throwing out people in many cases. It is respect for people. When there is respect for people, when people are feeling respected within the organization, don't try to change culture. Identify as to, in some pockets, if there is anything that needs to be changed, do it in a settled manner by exhibiting the right kind of behaviors. That's how I would respond to that question, Raj.
Thank you very much, PV. The next question is from Murali Krishnan. Managing millennial culture is difficult. Would like to know how we can manage.
Raj comes under millennial.
I knew the answer would be, to me, I'm a young, mother of a young teenager. Being a mother is difficult. Leave aside managing millennial culture is difficult. I think the part that we need to be sensitive about is there's no one template, right? Being open to various templates and diversity leading to success of teams is about cognitive diversity. It is about managing multiple diversity. So understanding people from their shoes is also critical, as much as putting the guardrails is critical. So I frankly speaking, if that thought process is there with managers, I don't see it as a challenge. It's not a challenge. I think it's an advantage. And one of the ways that I have tried to do understanding is, for the last 3-4 years, have interns, summer interns working with you. As leaders, it's critical because we lose touch and we are talking to a chain. Some of these, like you go and be in the customer's shoes, having interns, younger people working for you is super critical for you to understand the dynamics. And there are differences. But implement through those your products and services. Be as open. Don't be templatized. Is my one advice.
Okay. The next one is a very specific question for you, Raj. So let me just pause for a second. Would anyone else like to add to what Raj just said about managing millennial culture? Anyone else on the panel?
I can share one experience. I think that, what I have seen is, in the senior most leadership meetings, inviting some of those millennials and giving them a voice, voice out your observations, your comments. That works very, very well. Actually, I would say that that's where we can pick up not just the thoughts from the millennials, but also, the culture which they are bringing into the organization. I think, that is one practice that I have seen very, very successfully working in many of the companies, both Indian as well as multinational.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Anand, would you like to say anything on this before we move to the very specific question for Raj?
Right, Ranjit. Actually, don't judge, I would say, is one big thing. And if you stop judging and instead accepting the very essence of diversity, we can manage millennials, whatever generation that comes, because we are not judging anymore. We are trying to see what drives the individual, what works for them, and how to get the best out of those individuals for both themselves and the organization. So I would say don't judge would be probably some sort of a reference point to be able to assimilate different kinds of generations.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I come now to Jayaprabha's question for Raj. How leadership change in the bank can help a bank to resolve its liquidity crisis and NPA and make the bank regain its position without mergers and acquisitions and also recapitalization from the government? What's your perspective, ma'am?
Oh, I'm sitting in front of my board at NRC and discussing the same questions. But interesting thing is, one of the facets, and I go back to the question that was asked, what are the triggers for cultural change? One is, over a period of time, there would be some breaks that you see, whether business performance wise or even regulator changing the stance. I think one of the patterns or themes that we should be alive to is, especially in an uncertain world, regulatory oversight and customer oversight and advocacy and all of that will be high. So when Anand talked about the competing values, no market-led organization can leave the axis of stability, security, and controls. And that is also critical. In that sense, it is table stakes. So I would say it's a leadership change leading to change in culture, but I think getting the focus back in most organizations, it's also been hunkering down inwards, focusing on the basics, especially as you accelerate the journey, building the sustainable, strong foundation to build the institution has been the mantra. And COVID has taught us, many organizations, we are no exception, everybody has done that, but perhaps we even more so, getting the cadence, getting the rhythm, and getting that part of the axis right. As much as you're market facing, focus on your controls, focus on your processes, focus on your decision-making aspects as well.
Can the others hear her?
Let them go. And I'm sure once we have that foundation, because, people, once they get aligned.
Now we can't. She has frozen.
Hello.
You lost me when?
Don't worry. The others, I think the problem seems to be at my end today, surprisingly. But go ahead. I think the others were listening to you. That's fine.
So, I don't know where I lost it. I said, the competing values framework, and I'm using that analogy, increasingly uncertain world, organizations will be forced to look at the other quadrant of control, stability, security. You can't leave that. You can't make choice that this over this. And that's the learning that we've had, that and especially in COVID also, most organizations that I've spoken to have also hunkered down and focused inward, looked at the control and stability to build a sustainable franchise, build a sustainable institution as you go forward. So process control is absolutely critical, and then the performance will be there to see.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Raj. So that was a difficult question handled very deftly and well. Thank you. Now we come to a question from George Paul. Any specific model of culture that would be the most ideal in the service sector? So who would like to go first? I'm sure all three come with solid service sector backgrounds.
I can take that first.
Okay, go ahead, PB.
I already said, somewhere I have got these themes, what I was talking about, respecting people, inclusiveness, these are all the themes. But I would say that, inverting the pyramid. Inverting the pyramid, it's a concept. There is a framework around it. Inverting the pyramid is what? The entire organization exists to support the people who are supporting the customer. It is in a service organization, it is servicing the customer. That is the core of the business. If the entire organization, see, Jack Welch, I think, said, I'm not a big fan of Jack Welch or any such thing, but he said that when the entire organization looks at the CEO, they are showing the back to the customers. So this is where in a service organization, it is the inverting the pyramid. Entire organization should exist to support the frontline staff who would be supporting the customer. That's what I would say.
Right. So, may I, Rajivji? Actually, I would say that if you want to choose a framework, there is nothing like one framework. They are all like tools in a toolbox that you have to use wisely. So one of the things that we recently talked about, that Raj also alluded to, is the competing values. Whether you are this versus that. That could be one way to look at it. The second way to select a framework to think about culture is the alignment. So, for example, is your strategy aligned with your culture? Is your structure aligned with your culture? Is your shared values aligned with your culture? Style aligned with your culture? So another is to think of it through an alignment lens and say what work needs to be done. So that could be a second way to do it. The third is in terms of changes in the marketplace. So like the question that was hidden in the other question, next generation or millennials. So how is the world changing, and are we culturally attuned to attract this new generation of people? So what is the next future talent going to look like, and are we going to be an attractive employer for the EVP view to culture? Is a third way to look at it. So there are multiple ways to look at it: a competing values way, an alignment way, and probably a future readiness way. So these are all tools in a toolbox, and whatever works must be used is what I would say.
Excellent, excellent. So should we, with your permission, just move on to the next question, which happens to be for me. And the question is, my management is rooted in old ways of work like presentism, static goals, formal structures. How should I go about refreshing culture suited for the new normal? Okay, so it's a bit of a difficult question because I don't know where you stand in your organization structure, but maybe that's not very relevant. You know, I think what we do should be derived from the purpose of the organization. Why do we exist? What is the primary task? What problem are we here to solve, and for whom? Then you ask yourself, how can we best solve that problem? And do it in a way that is sort of better than what our next best competitor is doing. So you start from there, and from that you derive strategy, structure, processes, and metrics, which, if you like, is the hardware, and then the software. How do we behave? What are the norms of behavior that we are talking about? What is the role of management in walking the talk? We've heard a lot about that. How do we empower people? Because ultimately, and this is my belief, that once you have defined your purpose and once you have identified what problem you're going to solve, you have to unleash the potential of people and of ecosystems. And you can't do that unless you have empowerment. Inverting the pyramid, I think that has been talked about a lot, you know, having empathy. So you need to do all that, but for that you have to have the awareness and clarity that why do we exist and what is the best thing we need to do. So instead of being a prisoner of our own past, which a lot of us are, and actually the more dangerous thing is when we are a prisoner of our own past success. You know, that's a really dangerous thing. So that's all I can say, that be driven by purpose and primary task, have an open mind, and remember that it's not just one person. I think that's also come through very, very clearly. It's all about people. It's all about dialogue. It's about empathy and stuff like that. I think I have been clear as mud, forgive me. But maybe that's the time for us to move on to the next question. And oh boy, now I'm getting behind time and we are 11:58. So we still have another 12-13 minutes for questions. I'll try and take as much as we can. This is a question from Praveen Prakash. Apart from stories preservation, can you suggest a few more ways of inducing humanity in the culture? I think we have already addressed the question of humanism and humanity. Right?
But can I just take the question a little differently?
Yeah,
and maybe link it with the previous conversation, which is the world is changing as models change. How do we extend the culture behind a computer? Because if people are working from home, people are working part-time in gigs, and there are a variety of formats that exist. And I think for me, culture is going to be even more pronounced. Both competency and culture is about displayed behavior, especially if you don't come to an organization and it's not physically manifested in front of your eyes. How do you talk about the culture? And yes, I think stories is absolutely important, but in the stories, I think values, the core beliefs is something that needs to be reiterated. I'm a big proponent and advocate of actually talking about culture even more, not culture as in culture, but talking about the core beliefs, extending the stories, and talking about the choices, the paradoxes. We are the stories a lot more in the new reshaped world than earlier, because at least you had the circles where the managers were sitting across, maybe having informal conversations. One of the challenges of the newer world especially as people work from home with different formats, is the lack of informal interactions and perhaps the lack of the code. You need to codify the tacit knowledge. And that should be the role of HR also. And that will get impetus in the times to come.
Excellent. Excellent. Anyone else want to come in on that?
I can add a couple of things to it.
Sure.
I think that humanity is a great concept, great to have that as a culture. Closely related to humanity is humility. This is where, humility, humanity, humor, and hope. It's if the organization has got this 4H as the culture, I think that, that's a winning combination is what I believe.
Excellent. Great. So let's move on to Professor Shankar Sahai's question, and that is, isn't it that the culture of an organization evolves over a period of time? Some elements of a culture may be there 50 years back, but are given up by the next gen leaders. Okay, so I'm not able to fully understand the question, but if any of you would like to take from here, I mean, yeah, so some element maybe there, yeah, so the statement seems to be correct, but I'm not very clear what the question is. If any of you is clear about the question, why don't you just go
let me take a dab at it. I think it's about the preservation and altering a little bit, and I can give an example. Values are consistent. We've had values for the last 27 years. We've not tinkered with that because, the other thing that I will tell people is there is no point reinventing the wheel just because it is fancy. Don't change it. Some of these things are static. Keep it because it takes a generation or two to develop it. But what we can do is, under the values, there may be statements or behaviors that you have. Every word has to be contextual. And that's the power of evolution. If from respect everyone, maybe mutual respect is something that you want to put, please put that. Amplify it, contextualize it. And that's the work that we kind of did, but we did it not through an external person. Again, do it internally. It's far more powerful. Have your own guys debating, discussing, all of that. I think in all these activities, co-creation is another learning I have. Don't use a consultant. Don't get some leaders to talk about it. Culture is something that we own. All of us own without talking about it. We take ownership when it gets changed. Drive ownership when you are trying to contextualize it. I'm not saying change, contextualize it.
Excellent. Okay, so I hope we have answered Professor's question. Now, Praveen has come with a second question, so we'll just come back to it if we have time. So let me take Anil Kumar Pillai's question. If a particular culture is working in an organization, why change it? Don't you think culture is specific to an industry? Maybe what works in a cement industry may not be working in banking. Okay, would anybody like to take that? PV, you want to take that?
No, I thought Anand.
Oh, Anand, yeah. Sorry.
Okay, so sure. So I think I wouldn't characterize culture as industry specific. It is, I would characterize it as organization specific rather than industry specific. So it is the way the organization wants to compete and thrive in the marketplace. And there can be, a manufacturing company and a technology company can be alike in that respect, and different from another manufacturing company and another technology company. So I would say it is the way the organization wants to do business and the way it wants to thrive and grow and add value and impact. That probably is a bigger factor rather than the industry that it is in. It appears to be industry because each industry has evolved at different points in time in a different social context, and therefore it appears as if it is that way. For example, Ola is also doing manufacturing in Bangalore as part of their electric vehicles. I think the culture that they will be aspiring to create will be very different from what a traditional automaker would create. So they are technically belonging to the same industry. So that is the example I would say that it is not industry specific, but it is a manifestation of how the organization wants to do or go about their business.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Anand.
If we have time, just
Sorry, Bibi, sorry, we have just 5 minutes left.
yes,
But
please.
if you have a strong desire to say something, maybe
No,
just a sentence or something.
I'll do it later.
Okay, okay. So we have two other questions that are here, and we'll try and complete them in the next 5 minutes. The first question is, an organization with a strong culture always has a strong leader who has absolute control over the organization. Is it true or false? So who wants to take that?
Can I take it? Can I?
This is showing a red rag to a bull. Go ahead.
See, the words strong, control, and all that, many times, they indicate something not very positive. Rajiv, you talked about Sumantra Ghoshal and his concept of smell of the place. In the same chapter, Sumantra Ghoshal, and I would urge everybody to read that book, Individualized Cooperation, where he's mentioned all this in one chapter. Control is fundamentally, that works again is the right kind of culture, is my belief, and this is what I have experienced. It's not control, it is the empowerment. One leader at the helm of affairs trying to control everything, we need to look at it a bit cynically and understand as to what exactly is happening. So I'm not a great fan of controls, organization structures and all that stuff, hierarchy. So one needs to be a bit careful.
Thank you. So I'll sorry, Raj, you wanted to say something, but maybe you can take the next question. Huh?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, because we just have another 2 or 3 minutes, and then unfortunately you'll have to listen to a summary from me for a few minutes. So unless it's something really urgent, Raj, you want to come in? No. Okay. So here is the last question for you. Why has the culture of 360-degree performance appraisal not taken off? It is a concept which has been around for a long time, but hardly there in practice.
I think before that culture comes in, first of all, candid conversations, having candid conversations is fundamental, and it is imperative. And having a culture of hearing no is also should be something that is encouraged. Often we get into groupthink, people don't say what they feel, and when 360 comes and that can't be the only mirror that you're seeing, how will that flourish? You've got to think about the entire environment and how processes work, how decisions get taken. So I think in all the instruments and products and services of HR, we've got to just think about, do we have the environment for it to flourish, and what do you want to do it? Is it an assessment tool or is it a developmental tool? And I've seen enough organizations where, in fact, even in ours, where use it extensively for development. But if it's for assessment, we've got to be clear, how do we kind of use it without gaming it, because it can also get compromised. So be wary. On the other point, I just wanted to make the question itself is paradoxical. Here is where the entire conversation is saying culture belongs to everyone. And then we come back to this strong macho, I'm just using a gender, macho leader concept, control and all of that, and the person can drive the culture. And I think that's where the fallacy is. And that's something that I think the conversation today has helped highlight.
Okay, so we have 2 minutes before my summary starts. Anand, do you want to say something in 2 minutes?
No, I think it was a phenomenal conversation, sir. I think it was an excellent learning for me from the different perspectives. I think what is very heartening to note is that across industries and contexts, the culture is common and can be talked about very meaningfully, and we can all learn from each other by talking extensively about it. Has been a big highlight and takeaway.
I want to be cheeky, Rajiv. The questions to you.
Of course, go ahead.
People have talked about strong leaders driving the culture. As somebody who's been at the helm, have you changed yourself in different contexts?
Have I changed myself?
Yeah, have you changed?
Boy, to tell you the truth, I haven't. I have to be very honest with you. I haven't. My specifics may have changed. What is the strategy? What is the structure? But deep down inside me, that little child who was there, I must tell you, has not changed. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But the manifestation has kept on changing depending upon the situation.
But there you've given the answer. Does it really change?
Okay. So now let me quickly get back to try and summarize this fascinating conversation and interaction. It's difficult, so help me God. So let me start off. A, culture is the way people in an organization behave and the experience they create for their stakeholders as they go about their business. It is the smell of the place. It has to be aligned to the purpose and the primary task of the organization, which means it has also to be aligned or reflected in the strategy, structures, processes, and metrics, and in the HR levers. But ultimately, it's all about behavior. In the new normal, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, and pushback, to have innovation and to have sustained outperformance, you have to unleash the potential of people and ecosystem, and you can do that by creating passion, and passion is created if you can provide meaning and empowerment to people. What are the 3 or 4 behaviors that have stood out to me? One is walk the talk, to live the culture. It's, of course, you have to talk, but more importantly, you have to walk and live the culture. The importance of conversations, dialogue, and stories, of listening with empathy, and about creating trust. Then I wish to quote famous Peter Drucker oft-used, culture is important because culture eats strategy for breakfast. Finally, and now, this is really stretching it, Kamal. Maybe it's not a summary, maybe I'm putting my own stuff, but for whatever it is worth, what are some new age behaviors that I see we have talked about? Number 1, the ability in any situation to use the whole brain, combining logic, intellect, and rationality with empathy, with connection, with meaning making. That's one. Second one, being a multiplier of passion, energy, engagement, by not being the extreme command and control type, by not pretending to know all the answers, but asking the right questions and co-creating the answers, far from wanting to dominate, getting joy when 1,000 flowers bloom. Third, in the VUCA world, when innovation is crucial, knowing how to manage fear and learn from failure. Fourth, not being a prisoner of our own past. Last but not least, creating trust through authenticity, through truth, through compassion, and through a sense of service. So this is my take from this fascinating conversation. I think we have 3 minutes left, but I think we've come to the end of our session. Thank you all very much. I have learned a lot from the panelists and from the questions that have been asked by the audience. And now over to the MC. Thank you very much.
Much, Rajeev. It's a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Raj.
Thank you.
Anand.
Thank you. Thank you, PV. Thank you, Raj. Thank you, Dr. Rajeev.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Now I can see Siddiqui out there. Okay.
Outstanding, Rajeev. Excellent. PV, great to see you. Long time, Raj. Anand, we are always in touch in any case. Great. Absolutely big learning.
Defining and redefining culture in the current context. Enriching session indeed. Thank you so much, Mr. Rajeev Dubey, Dr. Murthy, Ms. Rajkamal, Mr. Anand, for sharing your insights and joining us at AIMA's HR Playbook. Thanks once again to all the wonderful panelists present over here. With this, we come to an end of this current session on culture.